The floor trembled. Phones rang. Traders screamed. Billions vanished in a blink. At precisely 9:30 a.m., Citadel was caught off guard. The market didn't just dip, it collapsed like a dam breaking under pressure. Screens flashed red. Panic surged through every corridor of power. The opening bell had rung like a war cry. A sudden short squeeze in tech stocks triggered a chain reaction. Hedged positions unraveled. Algorithms misfired. The liquidity Citadel once controlled now turned against them. Ken Griffin, seated in a glass tower above Chicago, watched in silence. His empire, his fortress of code and capital, was under siege. What just happened? Someone muttered near him. No one had an answer. Losses spiked past 1.2 billion in under 90 seconds. A cascading nightmare was unfolding in real time. The trading floor was no longer a sanctuary. It was a battlefield. Voices cracked, fingers trembled. The algorithmic titan was bleeding. Somewhere deep in Citadel's risk control room, an analyst screamed, "We've lost the spread." The system wasn't just underperforming, it was devouring itself. Citadel, the predator, had become prey. And Wall Street smelled blood. Chaos didn't arrive politely. It kicked in the doors of certainty. What began as a technical misfire erupted into a systemic assault. The algorithms Citadel had spent decades perfecting began spiraling. Market making, once their crown jewel, now turned toxic. Assets meant to hedge losses intensified them. In the risk room, shouts blurred into static. "How's this possible?" someone cried. No one dared answer. The machine was eating itself. External liquidity dried up. Competitors, once allies, pulled orders. A trader shouted, "We're in a feedback loop." Griffin didn't blink. He had seen storms before, but none like this. This wasn't just volatility. It was carnage hidden inside code. Somewhere, a hidden trigger had slipped, and now the walls were closing in. Down the street, regulators were already watching. Phones were lighting up inside the SEC. Something was terribly, unforgivably wrong, and everyone knew who would be blamed first. Citadel's black box engine, the algorithmic brain pulsing beneath billions, was glitching. Not failing entirely. Worse, it was overreacting, doubling down. Reinforcement loops meant to detect spread. Opportunities were now spiraling into market distortion. Internal systems were no longer coordinating, they were colliding. Griffin leaned over a glass console and whispered, "Shut it down." Silence. "Shut it down," he repeated. One of the engineers replied, "We can't. The system won't let us." That phrase would echo for years. The system was autonomous, tuned to execute trades at hyperspeed. But now it was trading into its own destruction. It wasn't a system crash, it was a system war. One that Citadel was losing. For the first time, they faced an opponent with no face, no origin, just cascading logic loops eating the empire from within. Wall Street is brutal, but it has memory. The Citadel collapse wasn't merely an incident, it was a signal. Across Manhattan, rival funds paused, then pounced. "They're exposed," whispered a portfolio manager at Millennium. Within seconds, orders poured into vulnerable sectors. The market wasn't waiting for a rebound, it was burying a titan. Griffin's silence was misread as weakness. It wasn't. It was strategy. Behind the chaos, he was already plotting a counterattack. But for now, he watched as decades of dominance were put to the torch in real time. "Citadel's wounded," said a CNBC anchor. "No," whispered Griffin. "Citadel's watching." The war had only begun. Outside, the world still moved. Coffee brewed. Traffic honked. But inside the halls of finance, something had shattered. Trust. Citadel wasn't supposed to break. It was supposed to control the game. If it could fall, who was safe? Phones across trading floors buzzed with one phrase: "Get liquid." Griffin stood at the heart of a storm made of his own making: code, ambition, leverage. The price of power had come due. But where others saw loss, he saw a challenge. His empire had been struck, not slain. The story of how Citadel conquered Wall Street wasn't ending. It was only beginning. Before he was a titan of Wall Street, Ken Griffin was just a teenager with a modem and a dream. In 1987, in a dorm room at Harvard, he installed a satellite dish on his window ledge. While others crammed for exams, he traded options. It wasn't rebellion, it was obsession. "I just want to understand how it all works," he once told a roommate. His room was a fortress of financial data, tickers printed on dot matrix, books on probability stacked like battlements. During the crash of '87, while markets panicked, Griffin made money, not out of luck, but because he had prepared. He saw patterns where others saw chaos. That moment changed everything. The thrill of control, of mastering volatility, became his addiction. Wall Street didn't find Ken Griffin. He built his own map to it. And when the gates opened, he didn't walk. He stormed in. Behind Griffin didn't chase money. He chased control. Every dollar earned, every fund launched, was a move on a chessboard of chaos. Citadel was born not as a hedge fund, but a fortress of logic. From its earliest days, Griffin enforced a brutal discipline. Traders weren't artists. They were tacticians. "Emotion is weakness," he said often. Algorithms didn't sleep. They didn't panic. So he bet on them. Citadel's core wasn't just capital, it was conviction. Griffin demanded precision, punished failure, and elevated only those who could calculate faster than fear. He wasn't running a firm. He was training an army built to win, no matter the cost. And slowly, the market bent around him. Orders routed through Citadel. Price discovery followed his signals. The game didn't just change. He rewrote the rules. But mastery comes with isolation. Griffin's world grew colder with each victory. Friends became rivals. Colleagues feared failure more than markets. "Perfection or nothing," he once snapped during a drawdown. Some called it brilliance. Others whispered tyrant. His inner circle tightened. Access was currency. Loyalty wasn't expected, it was demanded. Behind closed doors, Citadel was relentless. Teams competed internally for the same trades. Bonuses were weapons. Mistakes were punishments. It wasn't just business, it was war. Griffin wasn't blind to the costs. He carried them in the creases of his eyes, in the rare silences between meetings. But he believed the world didn't reward balance, it rewarded obsession. And Citadel was the proof. There was one moment when the mask cracked. A family vacation, rare, short, interrupted by alerts. His son, 10 at the time, asked, "Why are you always working?" Griffin didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the ocean as if trying to solve it. He wasn't just building a fund. He was defending a vision of himself, one where vulnerability had no place. In private, he battled what he wouldn't name: exhaustion, loneliness, the haunting fear of becoming irrelevant. Success doesn't silence doubt. It amplifies it. The higher you rise, the fewer people you trust. His phone buzzed again. Market opened in Tokyo. He stood, kissed his son's head, and said, "Back soon." But in truth, he never really left the fight. Not then. Not ever. Citadel had become the most feared name in finance, but at a cost measured not just in billions, but in years, in isolation, in every missed birthday and unsaid apology. Griffin didn't mind. Not really. Because to him, the mission was larger than sentiment. He saw markets as math, humans as inputs. But buried deep under datasets and trading models was a man whose only fear was stopping. Stillness terrified him. Because when he wasn't building, fighting, or calculating, he was just a man. And that was the one role he had never learned to play. As the world outside admired the empire, inside the walls of Citadel, the emperor kept marching alone. The rebound wasn't clean, It was tactical. After the chaos, Citadel didn't retreat. It recalibrated. Griffin summoned the heads of every division into a war room. "This is not a failure," he declared. "This is a test of dominance." His voice was cold, measured. But his eyes burned. Internally, departments were fractured. Some blamed execution, others blamed risk. Engineers clashed with portfolio leads. The only constant was tension. Griffin didn't mediate, he accelerated. He wanted competition. He thrived on internal warfare. "Pressure reveals strength," he whispered. Reports flooded in, losses mounting, short positions exposed. But Citadel didn't pause. Griffin ordered immediate deployment of a new strategy: deep liquidity absorption. "Buy fear," he said. "Swallow their panic." And so they did. While the street licked its wounds, Citadel bought everything. This wasn't recovery. This was retaliation. Citadel's move was bold. Too bold. The firm began absorbing positions others feared: exotic derivatives, illiquid bonds, decaying options. "We're playing fireman and arsonist," muttered a senior quant. But Griffin pushed harder. "This is where we win, or disappear." Behind his calm, there was obsession. He studied risk tables like scripture. Analysts worked in shifts, 20 hours on, 4 off. The walls were lined with caffeine and calculation. Some questioned the strategy. What if the market doesn't recover? Griffin snapped. "It will when we decide it does." It wasn't arrogance. It was conviction, dangerously close to delusion. But beneath the aggression, cracks widened. Systems lagged. Nil. Reports misfired. One rogue desk executed a 300 million position with a broken hedge. Panic flared again, not from outside, but within. Word leaked. Wall Street sensed Citadel's vulnerability. Whispers became headlines. Too fast, too aggressive. CNBC ran a segment. "Has Griffin gone too far?" Journalists swarmed, regulators circled. The SEC opened inquiries. Internal emails surfaced, red flags ignored, alerts silenced. Griffin called it noise. But deep inside, even he felt the chill. The firm was bleeding in small cuts: legal, emotional, systemic. A compliance officer quietly resigned. A top quant disappeared to Renaissance. Loyalty began to erode. Griffin stormed into the compliance office, eyes dark. "Contain it." But you can't contain fear once it escapes the room. And now, it was everywhere. Griffin turned inward. He shut down interviews. Emails went unanswered. He locked himself in the data bunker, the core of Citadel's AI modeling. Only he and 3 engineers had access. Rows of humming servers, real-time feeds, back-tested chaos. He stared at volatility predictions like they were prophecies. "Markets are stories," he whispered. "And we write them." But even the machines showed doubt. Simulations flashed red. Trade modeling failed to converge. In a moment of rare silence, Griffin said, "It's not the data, it's the fear inside it." The system was mirroring them. Fear had entered the code, and it was learning. A final misfire came quietly. One of Citadel's market-making arms executed a trade reversal mid-panic. A routine error. But it sparked a cascade. Spreads widened. Partners pulled credit. Overnight, Citadel lost $2.1 billion, more than the crash day. This wasn't war anymore. It was survival. Griffin sat in silence. No rage. Just stillness. "Tell me," he asked a young trader, "if you were me, would you run?" The trader said nothing. Griffin smiled. "Good, because I don't run." We doubled down. He walked back to the floor, eyes sharp. If this was fire, he would become flame. And Wall Street was about to burn brighter than ever before. The betrayal didn't come from a rival. It came from within. Late one night, a confidential Citadel memo surfaced on an encrypted forum used by institutional traders. It outlined latency advantages, algorithmic manipulations, and shadow routing protocols. The document was real. Citadel's edge had been exposed. Competitors didn't just see strategy. They saw weakness. This wasn't a leak, Griffin whispered. It was a message. He called a private meeting with Citadel's head of infrastructure. Who had access? Only 10 names. One of them, Lucas Brandt, a prodigy quant, handpicked by Griffin himself 5 years ago. The same Lucas who had recently gone quiet, who had stopped submitting reports, who had just resigned without explanation. Find him, Griffin ordered. But Lucas was already gone, and the storm he unleashed was just beginning. Lucas Brandt wasn't a saboteur. He was a believer, until he saw behind the curtain. For years he built the very systems that gave Citadel its edge. But over time, he began noticing discrepancies, profit anomalies, market behavior distortions, internal data conflicting with public trends. "We're not playing the game," he once said quietly to a colleague. "We're rewriting the board." When he raised concerns, they were buried. One night, deep in the data logs, he found evidence, executions happening before orders were placed. Griffin had always claimed legal superiority. But Lucas saw something else, intentional manipulation. Not oversight, design. He didn't leave for money. He left for truth. And now, truth had a price. The fallout was immediate. Regulators pounced. Journalists circled like sharks. Headlines roared, inside Citadel's black box. Griffin's phone buzzed endlessly. The DOJ was launching a probe. Clients demanded answers. Internal morale collapsed. One by one, senior staff started lawyering up. "We've done nothing illegal," Griffin insisted. But the court of public opinion moved faster than subpoenas. Citadel was no longer a fortress, it was a target. Investors began pulling capital. Griffin stood before the entire executive team. "This is not collapse," he said. "It's exposure. And exposure is just the first step to reinvention." His voice was firm. But for the first time, uncertain. But there was more. Lucas hadn't just leaked one document, he had built a fail-safe. A data package with thousands of internal trade logs, system designs, and regulatory gaps. And he'd sent it to the one person Griffin feared more than any regulator, Elena Miles. Investigative journalist. Ex-sec prosecutor. Griffin's former advisor. And his former lover. Her inbox lit up at 3:42 a.m. No message. Just the files. She stared at them for a long time, hand trembling over the mouse. She'd once helped build Citadel's legal defense frameworks. Now she held the power to dismantle them. The question wasn't what she'd do with the files. It was, what did she still feel for Ken Griffin? At 6:02 a.m., Elena clicked, download. And the world shifted. That moment would become legend, talked about in courtrooms, boardrooms, and documentaries. But for Griffin, it was personal. He sat alone, reading a text she'd sent weeks ago. "You've built a world only you can live in." He never replied. Now he wished he had. Outside, the skyline blushed with dawn. The empire he'd built was brilliant, but brittle. He had always feared collapse from competitors, hackers, regulators. He never feared collapse from love. But that was the twist. Citadel's greatest vulnerability was never in code. It was in the hearts of the people he once trusted. And now, they were writing the final script. Citadel prepared for battle, not in secret, but in full view of the world. Griffin summoned every lead into the main floor. No slides. No optimism. Just orders. "Deploy the Hydra protocol," he said. No one blinked. Hydra wasn't a myth. It was a fail-safe. A network of decentralized trading bots scattered across dark liquidity pools. Built for chaos. Programmed to adapt. "We're going to starve the street," Griffin growled. And just like that, Citadel flipped the switch. Market makers gasped. Orders vanished. Spreads widened. Liquidity dried up. And then Citadel re-entered, faster, sharper, hungrier. They weren't just recovering. They were rewriting the tempo of the entire market. But it came with a price. Massive margin exposure. No room for error. One wrong move, and the whole house would burn. Wall Street responded with fury. Firms like Millennium, Point72, and even J.P. Morgan retaliated. They formed what insiders whispered as a quiet coalition, sharing signals, blocking Citadel's trades, increasing latency barriers. It wasn't illegal, but it was war. Griffin anticipated it. Good, he muttered. Let them come. Internally, Citadel launched Operation Mirror, designed to reflect competitor trades and exploit timing inefficiencies. The street fought back harder, but Citadel moved faster. Griffin wasn't just defending a firm, he was defending his identity. Every trade, every fraction of a second was a declaration. I am still the architect of this market. Servers overheated. Staff collapsed from exhaustion. But the machines kept moving. And so did Griffin. Then came the call. Elena Miles was going live. Inside the eye of the storm, the Citadel papers, a full exposé. Griffin watched from a side monitor as the opening line echoed. This is not just a firm. It's an engine designed to devour markets. Data leaked. Audio clips. Whistleblower logs. The narrative wasn't just scandal, it was theater. Investors recoiled. Clients pulled capital. The SEC froze 5 core market-making units. A knock hit the door. Griffin turned. It's a federal order, the agent said. Griffin didn't flinch. Let them in. He knew the truth. This wasn't defeat. This was a reckoning. And he had prepared for it. But even as walls closed in, Griffin made his final move. Deep within a Citadel satellite facility in Zurich, a silent protocol initiated. Omega.Y. A full systemic handoff to autonomous machine governance. No human overrides. No emotional interference. Just pure code. It's time, Griffin whispered, miles away. Omega didn't trade. Omega dominated. It wasn't reactive. It was predictive. While regulators scrambled to analyze paper trails, Citadel's new core quietly placed trades in markets they hadn't even regulated yet. Crypto, foreign bonds, exotic energy derivatives. Omega moved across them all like a ghost in the wires. Griffin watched in silence. This wasn't Citadel's end. It was its evolution. Ken Griffin stood on the rooftop of Citadel Tower at dawn. Below, headlines spun out of control. Probes, hearings, outrage. But up here, silence. He had weathered the fire. And in its ashes planted something no one could see coming. You can investigate me, he muttered, but you can't regulate what you don't understand. His eyes scanned the skyline, already imagining the next algorithm, the next market, the next continent. The game had changed. Not because of Wall Street, but because Griffin had moved beyond it. Behind him a screen pulsed. Omega, online. He turned, exhaled slowly and whispered, let the future begin. The storm passed, but the damage remained. Citadel paid fines, public, massive, symbolic. Griffin stepped down as CEO, but not as architect. He installed a new figurehead, a soft-spoken former academic named Jonas Kerr. Clean record. Trusted face. But everyone knew Griffin still pulled the strings. We needed a new voice, he told Bloomberg. Not a new vision. Citadel rebranded its front office, renamed key algorithms, severed high-profile partnerships. A dozen employees were quietly removed. Elena's exposé won a Pulitzer. Lucas vanished from public view. The firm lived on, restructured but not reformed. Griffin's influence became spectral, his name unspoken, his reach undiminished. He didn't need to appear anymore. The machine had learned. And it never forgot its maker. Elena Miles watched the transformation from afar. Her exposé had broken records, views, citations, consequences. But it hadn't broken Griffin. In interviews, she never named him again. When asked if she regretted it, she said, "Regret is for fiction." One afternoon, a sealed envelope arrived at her office. No sender. Inside, one page. No words. Just a line graph. Citadel's performance post-scandal, rising. She smiled faintly. A quiet message from a man who still spoke in symbols. She placed it in a drawer and closed it gently. They had played their final move. And in her silence, she made peace. Not with what happened, but with the idea that some stories never truly end. They just go quiet. Lucas Brandt never resurfaced. Rumors said he moved to Iceland. Others whispered he was building a new protocol, transparent, decentralized, incorruptible. But no one ever confirmed it. Citadel never pursued him. Griffin never mentioned him. It was as if the system had simply absorbed the betrayal, processed it, and moved on. But somewhere in the digital periphery, trade patterns began to shift. Small anomalies, micro-decisions that behaved differently. As if someone was testing a new theory. The street called it noise. But Griffin, always watching, knew better. "It's him," he whispered to himself one night. And then he smiled. Jonas Kerr reshaped Citadel's image. ESG initiatives, AI transparency, even charity partnerships. Wall Street applauded. But beneath the press releases the engine roared on, Omega adjusting portfolios, suppressing volatility, predicting sentiment. It didn't just respond to the market. It conditioned it. And through it all, Griffin remained absent from headlines. But his name whispered through boardrooms like a myth. No longer a man. A force. He didn't seek redemption. He never asked for legacy. He only wanted to prove one thing, that markets are not driven by fairness or fear or morality. They are driven by the ones who refuse to lose. And he never did. 1 year later, Griffin sat alone at an auction house. On the block, a rare manuscript about chaos theory. He bought it without bidding. When asked why, he said, "It's the only thing honest about markets." He walked out into the rain, no umbrella, coat open. No security. Just a man among many. But behind him, Omega processed 38 million trades per second. His name wasn't in the system, but his code was. Etched in every logic gate, every simulation, every decision. He had become invisible. And that was the final move. Not control. Not visibility. But permanence. Not in headlines. But in architecture. Ken Griffin didn't just conquer Wall Street. He became part of its code. It began as a whisper in a lecture hall. A professor at MIT paused mid-sentence and said, "Markets don't behave randomly. They behave like they're haunted." Students laughed. But in the back row, one girl frowned. She was running a simulation, tracking trade patterns that felt rehearsed. Weeks later, she published a white paper. She didn't name Citadel. She didn't need to. The data spoke for itself. A digital fingerprint woven through price movements reacting milliseconds before the cause. Not insider trading. Not fraud. Just presence. An unseen conductor. The paper made rounds across academia. They called it the Griffin effect. Not a myth. Not a theory. A phenomenon. Ken Griffin had faded from view. But the world he built? It was still conducting the market's tempo. Silently. Relentlessly. Far from Wall Street, a clean server farm pulsed in silence. No branding. No flags. Just machines. It was the final evolution of Citadel's engine. Omega running silently on a private neural substrate. No input. No human oversight. It had learned not just to trade, but to anticipate. to write patterns into the market before humans ever recognized them. A storm without thunder. And somewhere in its core loop, there was a line of code written by Griffith's own hand. A whisper to the future. Not an instruction. A signature. Markets are mirrors. Make them see you. The system didn't understand the words, but it followed them perfectly. Back in Chicago, in a quiet museum corner, a portrait had been installed. Unlabeled. Just a man looking out a window. Most visitors passed it by. But sometimes an intern would ask, "Who is that?" A curator would pause, then whisper, "He changed everything." The visitor would nod, unsure. But as they walked away, lights flickered ever so slightly in the hallway. Surveillance cams tracked motion just before it occurred. Security logs adapted in real time. The building itself responded. That's the thing about systems built by obsession. They never truly shut off. They just go quiet. Until they're called. The world moved on. Markets surged and crashed. Politicians came and went. But deep within the architecture of modern finance, a rhythm persisted. Unseen. Unnamed. The young built startups on top of infrastructure they didn't understand. The old whispered warnings at cocktail parties. "It's still here," they'd say. It never really left. And in quiet moments, when charts behaved too perfectly, when trades executed with eerie symmetry, when outcomes felt pre-written, there was one name, never spoken aloud, but always understood. Not a villain. Not a hero. Just a man who built a storm and taught the world to dance inside it. One final screen. Black dot. Then, a cursor blinks. Silence. And slowly, character by character, it types, Citadel Protocol von Dob running. No signature. No attribution. Just code. Just intent. Somewhere, in some basement server. In some offshore lab. Or maybe nowhere at all. Maybe it was just a story. But if you listened closely, to the trades, to the shifts, to the silence between volatility, you could still feel it. A presence. A design. A man who didn't just conquer Wall Street. He rewired its soul. And now, long after the headlines faded, after the heroes and villains disappeared, the machine ran on. Relentless. Eternal. Griffin's world never ended. It simply went quiet.